Hey, Leading Learning listener, if improving as a learning business professional is one of your goals for 2026, make sure to go to leadinglearning.com/summit.
The Learning Business Summit is the only event laser-focused on professionals who lead and work in market-facing businesses that serve adult learners. Across 3 days online, you'll connect with peers and experts to strengthen both your knowledge and your network.
Featuring hands-on practitioners and subject matter experts, the live education sessions are designed for participation, reflection, and, most importantly, action to boost the reach, revenue, and impact of your learning business.
And because leveraging technology is essential for any learning business, the summit also includes demos of LearnTech platforms.
It all happens online January 27th, 28th, and 29th. Go to leadinglearning.com/summit to get all the details and join us for the Learning Business Summit.
Now, on with the episode.
If you want to grow the reach, revenue, and impact of your learning business, you're in the right place. I'm Celisa Steele.
I'm Jeff Cobb, and this is the Leading Learning Podcast. Many learning businesses know they need to innovate, but moving faster and experimenting can run headlong into culture and the fear of being wrong. This episode looks at why that happens and what to do about it.
The episode features my conversation with Elizabeth Engel and Jamie Notter, co-authors of the white paper Lean at 10, Culture Eats Methodology for Lunch. Elizabeth is chief strategist at Spark Consulting, where she provides membership consulting and also helps associations with new product development using lean startup methodology. Jamie is a consultant, speaker, author, and self-proclaimed culture scientist.
Elizabeth explains the core elements of Lean Startup and why this approach is especially well-suited to resource-constrained organizations like associations.
And Jamie speaks to the cultural patterns that can get in the way of effectively adopting the methodology.
Elizabeth and Jamie also talk about pairing Lean Startup with design thinking, building empathy with learners, and taking practical steps to make organizations more agile and more willing to learn.
If you're trying to move faster or innovate without burning out your team, the conversation with Jamie and Elizabeth offers not just food, but a feast for thought. So I want to talk to you guys about Lean at 10, Culture Eats Methodology for Lunch. And that's a white paper that the two of you put out. That title refers to the Lean Startup methodology. So I'm thinking that it would be great to just have you explain briefly what that methodology is and why you think it can be helpful to associations. And Elizabeth, I'm going to ask that of you.
Sure. So the methodology was developed by a guy named Eric Ries, and he had a background in Lean Six Sigma and also in startups. And he had kind of an epiphany that there was no point in working efficiently if you're going the wrong way. So Lean Six Sigma is all about like process improvement and being efficient and all that good stuff. But if you're going the wrong way, you just end up at the wrong destination faster. And so he wanted to stop this from happening as early in the process as possible. In any product development situation, he realized that you are making assumptions about certain things when you are thinking about developing something innovative, something new for your audiences. You're making an assumption about the audience. You're making assumptions about whatever the problem is that you think that they have. And you're making assumptions about what your solution might be for them. And any of those things could be off. So what he did is he constructed a methodology to help you figure out if one of those things is off and course correct as quickly as you possibly can. So there are a couple of kind of key elements to the methodology, and they are something called a lean canvas. That is basically it's a series of questions that helps you develop a one-page business plan that helps you surface your assumptions about audience, problem, and solution so that you can actually test them. So then, of course, that begs the question, well, how do you test them? That's the core of the methodology. It's the build, measure, learn cycle. So the idea is you build something, then you measure what's happening and you learn from it. And the additional elements that kind of help you do that, the thing that you're building is an MVP. It's a minimum viable product, which is really just a fancy way of saying a prototype. So you're basically trying to build something that approximates what your solution is with the absolute minimal investment of resources broadly defined that you can possibly do. So truly, it's a beta. You are making a prototype. Then you are getting it in the hands of your audiences as quickly as possible. That's the measure piece. And so when you're measuring what's happening with your prototype, you're not just asking people what they think. You're giving them a call to action and asking them to do something, and then seeing what happens. So that requires you identify appropriate, useful, good metrics. And that could be like a whole podcast in and of itself. Like, what are those things? And there's tons of resources out there that can help you kind of figure out what are metrics that actually matter to determine whether you're going the right direction on your audience problem and solution. And so then the idea is you've got all this data, so you're supposed to learn from it. And that's the third part of the cycle. And then what you're doing with that data that you have, that learning that you gain from going through this cycle, is you're making a decision to persevere. We're headed the right direction. Let's keep going. To pivot, we were not quite going the right way with regards to audience problem or solution, so we need to make some changes here, or kill it. Like, this whole idea was just, it's not going to work, and so let's stop this again with a small investment of resources and move on. Okay, so that whole small investment of resources thing that I keep mentioning is why I have felt for the past 10 years or more that lean startup methodology is so helpful for associations, because people look at it, or might look at it, association execs might look at it and say, well, startup, man, I'm not a startup. Why are you pushing this on us? And the answer is, we have some things in common with startups. One of the most important being, we have highly limited resources. Now, with startups, it's all about like your VC money and your runway, and that's not our world. But associations tend to be resource limited, and that's not just money. It's staff time and attention. It's volunteer time and attention. It's member time and attention. So because of that, we want to make sure that we are using those limited resources responsibly and in an efficient and effective way to try to help our members solve their biggest problems and achieve their most important goals. And that's what lean startup methodology can do.
Well, thank you for that explanation of the methodology, and then for why you think it really can help associations. Jamie, I have a question for you, because it's about culture, which I know is your area in particular. I mean, part of what you argue in the white paper is that it's culture that's holding back many associations from really being able to make use of lean startup methodology. So I want to ask you two questions. First, will you define culture for us and sort of how you think about that? And then second, what are the cultural patterns in associations that tend to derail or undermine lean startup efforts?
Sure. So my definition of culture is pretty short. Culture is the collection of words, actions, thoughts, and stuff, sorry for the technical term, that clarify and reinforce what is truly valued in an organization. Okay, so the culture in your organization is all about what's valued, because what's valued drives behaviors. And whether you've paid attention to culture or had a really all-on project to develop it, or anywhere in between, you've got one. People know what's valued whether you told them or not. And sometimes you tell them what's valued and they say, yeah, I know that's what you're saying, but that's not really what's valued, right? So people know what's valued, and they know that through the words you use, how you describe your culture, what you talk about, through the behaviors, the actions. And if the actions are different than the words, the actions win on that one. The behaviors are more important. Thoughts is about underlying assumptions, mental models, beliefs. Sometimes that stuff ends up driving behaviors in ways that's different than what you thought you would in your culture. And then stuff is just tangible aspects of work, right? So equipment you use, the way your office is designed, dress code, anything that's not like human, those things also tell people what's valued. And so that collection is a little complex, but it's out there. That makes it clear what's valued. What's valued drives behavior. So for the second question, what we say is valued is not always what is valued. Right. And what I have found around culture patterns is there are a lot of things inside organizations that everyone consistently says they want, like collaboration and transparency, and two that are relevant to lean startup, agility and innovation. Okay. We all want that. We say we want that, and we actually do value those things. Turns out there's a competing commitment, though, inside your culture that negates that value, or at least part of it, right? So innovation is the biggest one for lean startup. Elizabeth's description of the lean startup methodology, like, this is not our first rodeo, by the way. We've done a bunch of podcasts, and that was the best, like, most succinct description so far. Elizabeth, I give you an A+ on that one. It was really clear: build, measure, learn, and prototyping. That requires engaging in what I call the practices of innovation, which is experimenting and sometimes being wrong and being okay to fail. Because if all your experiments are right and they all succeed, you're doing them wrong, right? You're doing stuff you already know how to do. You're not going to get innovation by doing stuff you already know. So you need to be able to fail. And there's a commitment we have inside organizations, most cultures, that says, look, I value innovation. I want to unlock new value. This is cool. Let's do it, as long as nobody is ever wrong. As long as I don't have to say I failed at something. Like, we value being right. We value being the smartest people in the room. We value providing right answers to our colleagues and helping move the ball forward. That's a good thing to value. But if you push too hard on that, it generates behaviors where people say, well, we can run an experiment, but I'm not going to tell anybody. Or we can run an experiment, but I'm only going to just test a little tiny thing because I don't want to have to go to the board and say I did something and it didn't work. Right. And so we've got this pattern where we value the concepts but not the practices of innovation, and which means we say we will be behind lean startup and we will try it, and then no one does any experiments that are where you get the real learning. You know what I mean? Like, you do some experiments, but it's like, I don't know, I probably could have told you that outcome without running that experiment. We sort of make it small and it doesn't work. So there's several patterns that impact agility as one of them. We don't fix things, we don't stop things. That's a challenge for doing this work. And then my original background is in the field of conflict resolution, so this is a bias of mine, but our inability to have difficult conversations makes doing lean startup really hard. And a lot of organizations have that. There's the number one correlation between the 64 things I measure in culture is managing change and managing conflict. Like, if you can't do your conflict, you're going to have a tough time doing this change. You're not going to really, it's going to come out in the learning process, I think, right? You build, measure, learn. Well, what we learned was my original idea was right, but the customers were stupid and we need to keep going forward. And no one's going to say, no, we were wrong. This product is going to fail. You know what I mean? Like, if you can't have those real conversations, you'll sort of dumb down the learning, I think, right? And you end up doing the process, but making sort of not as good decisions and not getting as good results.
We're taking a quick break to remind you about the 2026 Learning Business Summit, the event built specifically for people who run, manage, and grow learning businesses.
If you're responsible for designing strategy, shaping products, or driving impact and revenue, the summit is designed for you. Over 3 days online, you'll learn from practitioners who are solving real problems in real learning businesses.
You'll take part in highly interactive sessions, no passive webinars here. You can expect thoughtful prompts, practical ideas, and space to reflect and plan your next steps.
You'll also get to see how LearnTech platforms are evolving through short, focused demos, helpful whether you're evaluating tools or just trying to stay current.
The Learning Business Summit runs online January 27th to 29th, 2026. Head to leadinglearning.com/summit to learn more and save your spot.
Well, so I heard you mention innovation practices. You mentioned difficult conversations. I know in the white paper, you kind of mentioned 4 culture areas. Those are 2 of them. You also mentioned the effective action and organizational clarity. And maybe I already know the answer based on what you've shared, but, do you sort of see that one of those tends to be the hardest for associations? Again, I know you already mentioned specifically innovation practices right at the outset.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the answer. Maybe you have another answer, though.
No, which is the hardest? All of them.
All of them.
Like, these are ones where actually most organizations, not just associations, really struggle. And the organizational clarity one contains the silo issue. And everybody is bad at silos. And silos are fine. You can have silos. What I don't want are silos where I can't see what's going on across those lines, where I can't step over the line and engage with someone. It's like, you should have fences between your silos, but they should be 1.5 feet high, right? Like, I know where the lanes are, but I can get across if I need it, and I can see what you're working on. That piece again, is across the board, but that I will say from working on culture and associations, that is almost always something that they actively work on when they start a culture design initiative, is the silo question, right? So that piece is big. The innovation piece is big, but I will say they are not unique to associations. They cut across. I work mostly in associations, but I have also worked in government and corporate and done. We've got a lot of data from those other industries, and the data look the same.
Elizabeth, I know that one other thing that y'all mentioned in the white paper is design thinking and how you feel like they can it can pair well with the lean startup methodology. So tell me a little bit about how those two approaches reinforce each other and kind of why you're seeing a place for both in associations.
Design thinking is basically creative problem solving that relies on human-centered approaches to innovation. And the concepts of design thinking parallel lean startup concepts really well. The two methodologies really complement each other. And if you read the white paper that we'll give you the information about a little bit later on, and as Celisa mentioned at the top of the podcast, you'll see that it was our National Council of Architectural Registration Boards case study. They were the ones who really built design thinking heavily into their particular, and this will be important to think about later, their particular iteration of how lean startup works. What they realized in putting together their lean startup practice is that empathy with your audiences, your members, your learners, etc., your customers, that's the key. That's kind of the secret sauce to really making this thing go. So you want to develop a member-centric, customer-centric perspective so you can learn what their real and significant problems are, what their most important goals are, that allows you to focus on providing solutions for those things. So to Jamie's point that he raised earlier, this whole idea of, the customers were just dumb, my idea is great. No, the customer is not wrong. You might be wrong, but that's okay as long as you learn something from being wrong. And that development of empathy and an empathetic practice of learning about your audiences is what's going to really make this thing go.
So I think that emphasis on empathy and the member perspective, the learner perspective, the user perspective, whoever that is really important. And I feel like it can be really hard to get the time and attention of members, learners, those users whose perspective is ultimately so important and that you really, really want. So I would love any practical suggestions you have for how an organization can get that input that it really needs. And Jamie, I'm going to throw this softball to you.
We say we don't have the time to get the information from the users, the learners, whatever it is. And in fact, we have all the time in the world to do that. We just choose to spend our time doing other stuff that's not as valuable. One of my mantras in this conversation, and I've said this outside of just lean startup stuff, is organizations run too lean. And I don't mean like lean startup. I mean, we are doing more with less times 100 years. And we've created a system where we have no slack. We have no ability to do what we need to do. And it doesn't have to be that way. One of the case studies that Maddie and I wrote about in When Millennials Take Over is a software company in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I'm going to get this wrong, but they had a position in the organization. I think it rotated, so it wasn't like a permanent job description. But on every project, someone was the customer anthropologist. Okay. And they went out and they lived with them. Right? It was like participant observation. If they were designing a wedding planning website, someone went out there and planned a wedding, right? With people who were planning weddings and talked to them about it and hung out with them and actually went to the dress shops and did the stuff and learned this is the empathy stuff, right? Learned their perspective really deeply. And they managed to do that and be profitable. So it's like, this is part of the agility piece because we're not stopping things. We don't stop things and we don't fix things. So we don't have the bandwidth to do it. Like, I just think we need to get much more disciplined about what activities are generating value in our organization and stop doing the things that are not generating value. And so that's kind of a bigger picture answer. I don't know if it's what you were looking for, but because you said practical, there's nothing more practical than freeing up time by not doing things that are not providing value anymore. It is hard to do, though. I get it, because It's part of it's cultural, part of it's just we've always done it that way, and part of it is by doing certain things, you then generate the demand for those things, even though they're not driving value. So it's a tough conversation to do it, but I think that's where people should be focusing.
So I think you answered kind of one side of the question, meaning like, if in my association we want to prioritize that empathy with the people we serve, we really need to put in the time and, like you're saying, maybe stop doing something else so that we do have the time to do it. There's the added layer too of if you really want that members or prospective members input, that takes some time on their side, or potentially, I guess, depending on your instrument. So sort of how do you manage to make the case to, the people that you want to build this product for? We want to do it the best possible way, but we need your input. And again, just knowing, I think that most people feel a lot of constraints and requests for their time and their attention. How do you kind of get them to engage and allow you, even once you do that work internally, to say, okay, this is important? How do you get that external buy-in to say, okay, I'm going to participate and give you feedback, whether that's through a focus group or a survey or whatever type of instrument you're maybe using?
Well, and Elizabeth can probably say this better than me, but for me, you're not giving them a survey and a focus group and asking them what they want. You are actually delivering something that meets their need, right? So you're saying, hey, I've got something that is going to make your life better. It's just an MVP. You wouldn't say it like this, right? But it's just an MVP. It's just a prototype. But I want you to use it and have it make your life better. And like, that's the incentive, I think, for someone to be involved. It's like, hey, I actually get to get my job done faster because of this. I get to be happier at work because of this. I get to, whatever your problem you're solving, you deliver that in a small way. And they're like, you mean I get to use this and it's going to make my life better? It's like, yeah, I just need to have a conversation with you at some point about how it worked and what was great about it or bad about it. You know what I mean? So.
And to yes and that, the other piece of this is, and if it doesn't make your life better, I need to know that. Like, tell me, this did not make my life better. If it is making your life better, but it's missing some stuff, I need to know that too. And one of the other things that people get freaked out about with this whole idea of giving somebody a prototype is, my members are going to hate that. They're not going to want to use something that's not completely beautiful and perfect and fully functional and blah, blah, blah. And sort of, yes, with a caveat, right? Some of your members do not want to be faced with a, sort of half-baked idea, a product that's still in the process of being fleshed out, et cetera. Some of them, you're right, they can't deal with that, but not all of them. And part of figuring out what your lean startup work is going to look like in your organization is figuring out who are my audience members that I go to them and say, I've got a prototype. I want you to help me with this. Tell me what you think, what's working, what's not working, what's missing, what did we put in that doesn't need to be here? They're going to go, that's great. That's exactly what I want to do. You have to know who those people are.
But also, I mean, I'm sorry to go on and on about this question, but like, if you've got something that you've designed that you think is going to make their life better, right? And you're testing that out, and nobody, including these people that you've identified that are the types that would like dig this, nobody has time to do it, then you've just learned. You don't got something here. You got to go back to pivot or whatever you're going to do. So the they don't have time thing is not an excuse, because you can find people who like it. And if they really don't have time, it's because they don't like what you're offering.
And in that particular instance, it's very likely that although you may have identified a problem that they face, it is either not a real problem or not a significant problem. It's just not high enough up on their priority list. So therefore, move on to solving something that's a bigger deal for them.
Elizabeth, I know in this white paper, and you've made the argument before that really associations, while they serve, many of them through their education and training and other offerings, while they serve lifelong learners, they need to act themselves organizationally as a lifelong learner. So talk a little bit about what that looks like. How does an organization start behaving more like a lifelong learner?
The key underlying attitude change that you need is you need to, from top to bottom of your organization, develop a constant curiosity about your members and other audiences and their worlds and their operating environments. And just task everyone with becoming a sponge for gathering information. You kind of want to develop that really deep interest in learning about what drives my members. Once you've got that piece going, everybody's curious, everybody wants to know what's driving your members. They're all collecting information as, often and frequently and in as many formats as they can. This gets back to Jamie's thing about that you need fences between your silos, but they need to be really, really low fences. You want to be transparently and openly sharing that information internally, which means you can't sit there and hoard data like this is mine and I'm not sharing it with anybody else because reasons, right? You've got to be willing to share data across those low fences and also across your hierarchies. So your frontline staff, kind of customer service people, those who are interacting with your members and your learners and your other audiences on a day-to-day basis, they get all kinds of insight that often doesn't kind of make its way up the chain. You need to create mechanisms for that to happen. The other thing that is really useful, both to becoming a learning organization and sort of your larger lean startup practice, is suspending your need for immediate certainty. You basically want to be extending your process, your time period in which you are asking questions, in which you are developing hypotheses, in which you are testing hypotheses. We don't have to know the answer immediately. We just have to keep asking good questions. So a really short example of developing a learning practice. When I worked for the Children's Hospital Association, which at the time was called NACRI, one of my areas of responsibility was running our corporate partnerships. And we were doing all right with corporate partnerships when I came in, certainly making some money, but there was definitely potential there to make them happier and to bring in more money as a result. And so back to Jamie's whole thing, the example of that person at that startup in Ann Arbor who was tasked with going out into the field. That's exactly what I did. We had corporate partners all across the country. And yes, I had to get approval to do this. And there was some investment of money. But the first year or so I was there, I visited every single one of our corporate partners in their offices, wherever they were, to talk to them about what are your goals with our audiences? What are you trying to achieve here? Where are the barriers that you're finding? What opportunities do you see, et cetera? So that sort of that curiosity, get out there, talk to them, pick up as much information as you possibly can, and then bring it back and share it, not just with our little team running corporate partnerships, but with all of our program areas across the association. Like, here's what these people are looking for and what they are trying to achieve and what they want to do. How does this potentially fit with your program area? Some program areas it didn't fit at all, but some program areas were like, oh my God, we have a thing over here that we never thought about pitching to a corporate partner that that could help them. It would help us. Everybody benefits.
If there's an organization that doesn't feel culturally ready to try out this lean startup methodology, or maybe they've even toyed with it some and haven't had a lot of success, what's a small but meaningful step that organization can take to try to get more culturally ready for something like lean startup?
The first step is conversations with your people about what your culture actually is, like what it really is, not what you want it to be, not what the ideal culture is, not for the love of all things holy, your core values. Like, you can do all that stuff, but that's later, because that has to come from where you are. So have a conversation. You could take a culture assessment and get real data and talk about it. That's fine too, but that's not a simple step. The simple step is just getting around the table and say, like, on the key things like innovation, agility, transparency, collaboration, big topics, big concepts that everyone likes. How do we do on those? How do we do that? And ask yourself, like, where are we doing it well and where are we not doing it well? Like, no one wants to have that conversation about where we're not doing it well in our culture. And you just need to have it because it is what it is, right? And if you start to have the conversation that says, you know what, we love to share information, but we also like to control it. To Elizabeth's point a minute ago, right? Like, I feel so much better if I just have control of this information, right? It's like, why do we do that? Well, you can talk about why you do it. It's like, well, where could we let go of a little control? Like, then, so the conversation about what your culture is, and then try some stuff that would fix those parts that you think are holding you back. Like, and this, I use this example all the time. Hey, how about after our senior team meetings, we share the notes with everybody? Oh, no, I don't know how people would use that. And there's confidential things that happen in our meeting. Don't share the confidential stuff then. Just bullet points, let everyone know. Like, okay, we'll try it. And then when they do, they realize nobody cared. Because you talk about boring stuff in your leadership team meetings. Okay, that actually makes me a little more relaxed. Like, it just, whatever. Like, these little behaviors start to loosen things up. And it's an experiment. So I just Trojan horsed a little bit of experimentation into your culture by having you experiment with your culture. But it kind of just loosens things up a little, and suddenly you've got people that are willing to say, you know what, I don't know that I can do a full lean startup on this, but I'm going to start changing the way we ask questions about our new product development in our meetings. Right. And so you can see some changes around the edges, even like right away. And again, the more progress you get with that, then the more bold you're going to get and say, you know what, we really need to overhaul this piece of our culture around experimentation. And so let's get a team together and let's really design sort of a new way of doing things, right? That's the big sort of culture change stuff. So you can kind of get your way there through smaller changes that, as long as they keep working, will give you momentum.
You guys do include some case studies in the white paper, and I really appreciate that because I think that it helps bring these concepts alive. And so, Elizabeth, when you think about those case studies, what's maybe something that one of those associations that you highlighted did that listeners might consider doing or trying out in their own organization?
I actually have a quick one from each of them. So the National Registry of Emergency Medical Technicians, they started by creating a shared definition of innovation, which is really important because we tend to talk about it a lot without always making sure that we all mean the same thing. And they started there. The National Council of Architectural Registration Boards, which I already mentioned, they figured out how to adapt the methodology to their own culture and way of working. They were the ones who said, we got to bring in this whole design thinking, empathy piece. You don't just kind of go to the store and buy the box of lean startup methodology and you open it up and out pops this fully formed practice that you could just run with, right? You have to make it your own. And the American Association of Veterinary State Boards invested time in training their team, including their board of directors, so that kind of everybody understood what was happening. It's because you probably noticed when we first kicked this off, and Celisa asked about kind of what are the key components of the methodology. It's a little jargony, right? And if some of your folks develop facility with that and some don't, it's like you're not part of the secret society. Well, they made sure that it wasn't a secret society. Everybody understood and knew what was going on. And if you ever see me in person and want to talk about this for your listeners, ask me about the minimum viable lemonade stand, because it's a fun story.
I love a little Easter egg in a podcast, so people can follow up with that. Well, I really appreciate the fact that you guys put out the white paper, that you made the time to come on the podcast and talk about it. There's a lot more in the white paper. We will make sure to link to that in the show notes and really encourage listeners to go and download that and look into it. But as we're beginning to wrap up, I would love to know from each of you if there's sort of one thing that you hope listeners take away from the conversation today. What is that? What would you kind of have be that highlight for them? Jamie, you want to go first?
I'm just going to repeat the understanding what your culture is piece. Like, start that conversation. Stop being afraid of culture and thinking it's too big and too hard. Just start having the conversation that says, we've got a culture and it's driving behaviors here. What is it? And which behaviors are the ones that are getting in the way? The sooner you start that conversation, the sooner you get to the other side where you've got a place where everyone loves working there. So and where you can do lean startup. So I would start with changing your conversation about what your culture is.
Elizabeth, how about you? What takeaway?
I would say pick a project that's completely under your control, experiment with the methodology, and then share the results widely, whether it is persevere, pivot, or kill. When people can see how the methodology works and see it working in their own organizations, they'll want to try it themselves. I mean, that is, if you read the AAVSB case study, that is very much what's happened there, because they've made this, back to Jamie's part of this, part of their culture. It is now the case that anytime anybody comes up with an idea for something, they go to AAVSB's Chief Innovation Officer, Chrissy Bagby, and they're like, hey, Chrissy, can we run this through the methodology?
I'm going to add on to that, though, because this is such an important point. we've talked about how your existing culture can prevent you basically from doing lean startup effectively. I don't know, it's not converse or inverse. I don't know what it is, but it's one of those verses. You can change your culture by running this process. This actually could be a culture play in my language, where you say, you know what, we need to be better at experimentation. So I want to run this process, and we're going to see if it works. It's interesting that if you consciously make it part of culture change, suddenly people are like, oh, well, it's a culture change thing. Let's try it out. Right. Whereas you just went to the boss and said, you need to do lean startup because it's the best thing ever. Like, oh, no, that's too hard. You know what I mean? So it also can sort of open a window if you frame it as, we're going to use this as a way to try and change our culture.
So this is the Leading Learning Podcast. So we do always like to ask guests who come on about their own learning practices and habits. So I would love to hear from each of you about how you continue to grow and improve yourselves. Elizabeth, tell me a little bit about your approaches.
That is actually the point of the whole white paper series. So I've been doing these annual-ish white papers ever since I launched Spark 13 years ago. And that's how I pick whatever the topic or focus of that year or year-ish's white paper is going to be. What's something I think associations need to be paying more attention to, that I want to do a deep dive on and learn more about myself. So pick the topic, do the research, find the co-author, make it so.
Great. Jamie, how about you? How do you approach your own learning?
So recently I've switched as part of my deciding within the last year that I wanted to call myself a culture scientist. So if I'm a scientist, I need to do research. And so it's a little bit following Elizabeth's model, but I now try and identify what my research question is. And then once I have a research question, then I need to create a practitioner guide based on the research that I put out in the community, and people use it to do things and experiment things and then report back learning to me. So the key for me, probably done this before in my career in different formats, but the key is creating a structure, like Elizabeth was talking about, right? I need a structure where I'm having questions that I want answered, and I need to go out and do it. I also read a book and think that's interesting. There's other, right? We do this all the time, but without the structure, it's too slow, in my opinion. So that having a structure of kind of question, investigation, and next steps is, I'm finding very, very useful.
Well, I like that both of you prioritize very active, hands-on learning in your answers there. This is kind of rolling up your sleeves and doing something with whatever it is you want to learn more about. Do either of you have something else that you are hoping to have a chance to say that you haven't yet had a chance to say in the conversation?
Both the culture work and the lean startup work are ultimately about speed. And I can't say enough how much speed is needed in the association world. And I've used this on some other stuff that Elizabeth and I have done, but quote from Justin Trudeau, former Canadian Prime Minister, the pace of change has never been as fast as it is today, and it will never again be this slow. Right? That line is going in one direction. And honestly, with AI and everything else that's going on, I think it's getting steeper. And I still hear associations saying, well, I'm going to go ahead and develop my 5-year strategic plan, and I'm going to go ahead and wait. Well, the board doesn't meet until next August, so we'll make that decision then. I hear lots of slow in associations. And so I just think it's really imperative that we move to make these kinds of changes, to do these kinds of processes, if we're going to keep our heads above water. So I just want to add some urgency to it.
We're not done quite yet. Stick around for our recap.
You will find show notes and a transcript at leadinglearning.com/episode 470, along with a link to download, completely free, no sign up required, the Lean at 10 Culture Eats Methodology for Lunch white paper, plus links to find Jamie and Elizabeth online.
If you got value from this episode, please share it with a colleague or leave a rating and a review. Those actions help others find the Leading Learning Podcast and support the work we're doing.
One thing that stayed with me from the conversation was Elizabeth's admonition to suspend the need for immediate clarity. Her invitation to linger with the questions and hypotheses rather than rushing to solutions feels both countercultural and exciting to me.
And speaking of culture, I appreciated Jamie's comment at the end that there's an urgency to this work. There are real costs associated with not doing this work.
And I think it's interesting to think about those two takeaways side by side. There's kind of a surface level disagreement, Elizabeth encouraging us to linger and Jamie urging us to action. But I think at a deeper level, their advice is 100% compatible.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, taking action should be predicated on the idea of what's the right action, or at least what's an appropriate action to take. And determining that right or appropriate action usually involves asking good questions and developing and then testing hypotheses.
Thanks again for listening, and see you next time on the Leading Learning Podcast.